Back in college, I majored in political science and economics at a Japanese university. Well, technically, I majored in global political economy, but not sure why our department calls it this, as in order to get a degree in global political economy at Waseda, you have to get half your credits in poli-sci classes and half your credits in econ classes in order to graduate. So kind of like a double major. So to be fair, I didn't really study much about the global political economy, as I mainly studied Japanese politics when studying for my half portion of poli-sci courses and economics by Japanese professors, mostly relating to Japan when it came to the empirical applications of theory for my half portion of econ courses. But despite studying econ at one of the better universities in Japan, to be admitted to study economics other than like Tokyo or Kyoto University where all the geniuses go, understanding the economic phenomena that happens in the island nation of Japan is, if put it nicely, quite difficult, but put it more realistically, an absolute mind of a challenge. And that is quite unobvious of a result, as even the geniuses, such as Professor Tomura, whom I respect tremendously and have had the privilege to receive a lot of advice and guidance from as he supervised my graduation thesis, told me before that he literally wasted so many years of his PhD phase. By the way, his thesis title was Economic Analysis of the Post-1990 Stagnation in Japan, as he found himself stuck attempting to find the answers to the enigmatic post-1990 economic stagnation in Japan. And it's not just the economy of Japan that does not follow the conventional wisdom of the world and leaves everybody perplexed. It is literally like this for most social phenomena in Japan. And this is again, not just because I've lived decade plus years in Japan studying, working and building my life in the nation and have fell into the trap of thinking that the place where I live is somehow more special and unique compared to every other place on earth. I've lived in my fair share of countries around the world at this point. South Korea, the UK, Malaysia, Australia, if counting the countries where I've actually lived in, although nowhere as long as Japan and not just go traveling. And as our subscribers most likely know at this point, based on the type of content that we create on our channel, I love observing and analyzing different types of social phenomena and see how people within these different social and cultural settings interact with one another. And although my analysis, especially if based on just empirical observation and pure bro science based on the limited boundaries of my subjective knowledge and experiences, can often cases be wrong, what I can say for sure is that throughout my time in each of these countries, I often come to this type of eventual realization in the lines of, yeah, despite how we come from different cultural backgrounds, at the end of the day, we're all human beings and all have a similar universal code. But after decade plus years of living in Japan, all of such previous conjectures and beliefs I had regarding the sense of universal pattern and code in human thinking and behavior just completely went out of the window. Thus the reason why I wrote my book, The Secrets of the Japanese Mind, and originally opened this YouTube channel in order to advertise my digital book. Please click the link in the description if you're interested. Again, shameless plug as this is my life's work. I mean, I quit my job in Japan and just relied on our savings for like an entire year and a half in order for me to focus on researching and writing this book. I also automatically send you my priority email address as well, along with our digital book purchase, where I respond to all emails within 24 hours. The priority email address may be useful for some of our subscribers who may have some follow-up questions regarding the contents of the book, or for some of our subscribers who may have some personal questions. But back to the topic. One of the key reasons why understanding any social phenomena in Japan is so challenging of a task is because of how we are often faced with completely contradictory set of information regarding a subject matter, which makes it hard for us to reach to any reasonable conclusions. There are literally so many examples that I can give for this, but let us stick to the topic of economics for now, as this is the topic of today's video. On the YouTube platform right now, you will see a number of street interview videos conducted in Japan where you'll see people say that they feel that Japan has gotten substantially poorer as a nation, not to mention as individual citizens. And around 2 weeks ago, a number of reports came out stating that Japan has now officially slipped into recession territories. So one may come to the conclusion, the Japanese economy is still doing bad and the people are getting poorer by the day. But then please have a look at this chart. This is a 13-year comparison of two national stock market indexes of two East Asian countries. When asked which national market index of the two looks like the market index of a country that has recently entered into recession, then anybody would undoubtedly say the market index represented by the red line. But that's not actually the case. The market index represented by the red line is South Korea's KOSPI, or Korea Composite Stock Price Index. the market index of a country in which for the past 13 years have went on to solidify its stance as a developed nation with strong performances from the nation's flagship corporations such as Samsung. The skyrocketing market index, represented by the blue line, is Japan's Nikkei 225, or the Nikkei stock average, the market index of a country that has officially entered into recession. And just saying that the Japanese financial markets are quote-unquote doing well would be an absolute understatement. Literally just a couple of days after the announcement of the nation slipping into recession, Japan did not just announce the benchmark market index to be performing well or showing signs of hope,
sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit,
but hitting an all-time high, not just surpassing the average levels during the nation's economic bubble era, but surpassing the peak levels reached at the height of the economic bubble era in Japan. But then, achieving all of this in a recession? So yet another paradox posed to us in the process of our attempts to understand a side of Japan. And many people usually cannot handle the confusion, so often resort to the terse, simple conclusions.
だからさ、こうシンプルにね、まずその
I believe on the YouTube comment section, you more than often have a few sentences long, but nonetheless commanding and resolute comments such as this one. And because the commenter ended his point with the word period, he must be right, right? I mean, in all honesty, the weak yen did have a large influence on the stock market prices. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, possessing such a mindset where one believes that a single factor can come to explain everything that there is to depress movements within the Japanese stock market and leave absolutely no room for any further discussion is also going to make them miss out on being able to grasp the holistic picture of why the Nikkei index is currently skyrocketing the way it does, while the average citizens suffer. So through this video, let us come to have a better understanding of how Japan was able to achieve this paradoxical phenomenon of entering into an economic recession with the citizens feeling poorer by the day, while simultaneously surpassing stock market levels that has now officially went beyond the levels reached at the peak of the nation's economic bubble era. But before diving in any further, please watch the quick sponsor video created by Helen, who put together this beautiful promo section for Tokyo Treat and Sakurako. I was going to film this month's Tokyo Treat videos, as Helen had quite a resilient case of stomach flu over the past week, admittedly still has them now as well, but still said that she was fine and that the Tokyo Treat box promos are hers to film. So if you guys want to say anything nice about our channel, please have them all directed at the beautiful editing and promotion segments of our video, which are done by Helen. As many of you who have made a YouTube video may already know, the editing of the videos just takes so much manual work, and I honestly believe that the video editors behind the scenes in the bigger YouTube channels should receive so much more recognition than the one that they currently do now, rather than having all praise directed to the voice and face of the channel. So please watch our promotion and consider purchasing your Tokyo Treat and Sakurako box today using our link in the description. It really supports our channel a lot. Thank you.
日本はお花見の季節がやってまいりました。日本で花見といえば当然桜のお花見を意味します。今回桜のシーズンになって皆さんにご紹介したいことは東京ツリと桜子の桜ボックスです。東京ツリと桜子は最大20種類のお菓子が詰まったボックスを我が家の玄関先まで配送してくれる日本スナックの景観購読システムを提供しています。東京ツリは日本現地特選のスナックやユニークな限定版、季節ごとに特色あるスナックが組み込まれたボックスです。こちら今回の桜ボックスです。桜のカステラ、せんべい、ミニクッキーなど限定のスナックと濃い抹茶味のキットカットが入っています。そして桜子、こちらには日本のお菓子メーカーをサポートする日本の伝統的なお菓子や職人が作ったお菓子など日本の伝統を存分に感じることができる特別なボックスであります。桜子もシーズンに合わせた桜の餅、ドーナツ、キャンディーなどといろいろな伝統のお菓子が入っています。こんなに綺麗なお皿と桜のお茶も入っていますね。どの国にいても海を越えて日本の特別なお菓子が詰まった作り物を受け取る気分は素晴らしいものです。 欠陥購読で毎月1回異なる特別なお菓子ボックスを受け取ることもできるし、月ごとに構成される楽しいテーマのお菓子ボックスを一度だけ体験することもできますので、私のように特別なプレゼントを受け取る気分を味わいたい方、または今月の日本のお花見が楽しめる桜ボックスを体験したい方は、ぜひ以下のリンクから購入してください。本当に忘れられない思い出になるはずです。
So let's end the debate once and for all. Are the individuals in Japan actually poor? Or are they like portraying the outward tatamae of looking like that they're poor in order to look humble when they are in fact rich? On the surface level of things, the answer is they are wealthy. According to statistics released by the Bank of Japan in 2023, total household financial assets held by the people of Japan reached new record high of 2,115 trillion yen by the end of June 2023. This comes to more than 14.1 trillion US dollars. In comparison, Japan's neighboring country, South Korea, held 4,652 trillion Korean won in total household financial assets in the year 2023. This comes to around 3.5 trillion US dollars. So based on how Japan has a population that is approximately 2.4 times higher than that of South Korea, if we times the total household financial assets of South Korea by 2.4, it still only comes to around 8.4 trillion US dollars, still far lower than Japan's number of 14.1 trillion US dollars total household financial assets. And in addition to that, many citizens in Japan being the type to save their money almost with a sense of vengeance rather than investing it in the form of stocks or real estate. 1,117 trillion yen out of the 2,115 trillion yen number came from pure cash and deposits, meaning straight up liquid assets that are not tied to any kind of real estate, 10-year government bonds, etc. And at this point, many would just stop and say, so the people in Japan are still more rich than we think, period. But we know that this sentence just ended with the word period. So what does this mean? This means that we have to keep researching. And often, the harsh truth about life is that so many of our life solutions always lie in the most boring of places, or require us to do the most boring of acts on a consistent basis in order for us to be able to reach to that solution. To get fit, repetition of repetition of repetition of exact same reps in the gym for multiple years. The most boring chicken breast, brown rice, broccoli, and a selection of fruit on a consistent basis will oftentimes result in something beautiful, which is, of course, a fitter and healthier body. And what is the equivalent of that boring chicken, rice, and broccoli meal when we are conducting research on the internet? Yes, government papers. If you can read Japanese, then you'll realize that if you read around enough, in this most boring corner of the internet, that is the official Japanese government website, lies something beautiful. In this 2022 Household Savings and Debt Report created by the hard-working civil servants at the Japanese Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications, you will come across this bar chart. The white bar represents savings, while the blue bar represents debt. And what we can observe here is that individuals below the age of 40 in Japan possess far more debt than savings. In fact, substantially larger debt than savings. And this gives us a eureka moment as to finally comprehending why so many people in the Japanese street interviews all claim that their life is hard and how they feel that they're getting poorer. Because most people who appear in the street interviews are under the age of 40 or at least under the age of 50. And most of them are heavily under debt in a country with stagnant wages and high inflation. Now, let us have a look at the savings to debt ratio of the average households in Japan from the age of 60 and above. The situation has become entirely different to the people in Japan under the age of 40. On average, a Japanese household from the age of 60 and above have a savings rate that goes above 24 million Japanese yen, which is above 160,000 US dollars. In comparison, they almost possess no debt, with them on average possessing a mere debt number of 1.49 million Japanese yen, or around 9,900 US dollars. Combine this with the fact that Japan is a country full of old people, and if you remember the information in which you mentioned earlier, much of these savings are in the form of deposits or pure cash under the beds of the Japanese elderly due to the general disinclination of the people in Japan to invest their money in the form of stocks or real estate. So the investment funds both in Japan such as Nomura or the ones abroad just cannot control the excited heartbeats when they hear of a government policy that could potentially motivate the elderly in Japan to inject their immense amount of cash savings into the Japanese stock market. many of you who may have traded stocks through an online brokerage account know that the taxes in which the brokerage company cuts from your profits whenever you complete a trade is a huge pain. But this is no longer going to be a problem for the individuals in Japan whenever they want to invest in the stock market, meaning their investment balance of up to 18 million Japanese yen is going to be permanently tax exempt if they hold it in a NISA account. NISA, or the Nippon Individual Savings Account, is a Japanese government tax-free stock investment program for Japanese citizens. And although the NISA account already existed in Japan since 2014, started by the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe as a part of his Abenomics government policy to boost the Japanese economy,
by my Abenomics.
The current Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, as a part of his new capitalism scheme, brought a major change to the existing NISA plan in order to stimulate households to get their banknotes hidden under their beds in their houses out into the Japanese stock market. Before January 2024, NISA offered benefits that were far less than the one that has been recently implemented, bringing a rather unenthusiastic attitude from many of its citizens. The amount of tax-exempt investment allowed each year was only 1.2 million Japanese yen, or around $8,000, with only a total maximum limit of just 6 million Japanese yen. Any capital gains over that was fully taxed. And to add to that, the tax-exempt period only went up to 5 years. But with Kishida's new NISA plan, an individual will be allowed to hold a combined total balance of 18 million yen in NISA, far higher than the previous 6 million yen limit. And to add to that, the capital gains will be tax exempt permanently and not receive the 5-year limit on the tax exemption period as was the case before. And because of this, analysts in Japan speculate that the bubble-era surpassing performance in the Nikkei index in the month of January 2024 was partly due to the expectations of future increase in the amount of investment that will be conducted by the Japanese domestic households with the new NISA overhaul, with foreign funds also hearing upon this and increasing their purchase of Japanese stocks in the month of January 2024. But then some may still say, hey, the elderly in Japan, regardless of how good the conditions of the new NISA plans are not going to get the banknotes under their beds and invest. And to be honest, I actually partly agree. And here is where we now almost go into the more bro-science territories in which I've heard in Japan, but have not seen it being mentioned much abroad. Again, I believe you all know that none of this is financial or investment advice, and the sole purpose of this video is to educate you on understanding the complex reasons behind the skyrocketing movement of the Japanese stock market index, despite the nation simultaneously entering into a recession. So with that said, both the domestic funds in Japan as well as the foreign mutual and hedge funds really could not care less about the broke Japanese people under the age of 50 investing.
You're broke! You're fucking poor!
What they do care about though is the mountain of cash being currently held by the elderly in Japan moving into the Japanese stock market. So here's a bro science type of answer being circulated in Japan that I'd like to share with you guys. As many of you already know, Japan lost in the Second World War, and the nation, being broke as can be at the time, took a financial measure which, all things human rights considered, was tremendously heartbreaking for many of its hardworking citizens. In March 1946, the Japanese government imposed a deposit blockade and banned the circulation of old banknotes. The government demanded the people who possessed old banknotes immediately deposit their money into the bank, as these old banknotes will now all be annulled. But then the funny thing was, once their money has been deposited, the individual could not withdraw almost any of their money. In essence, robbery on a national scale. Now, the Japanese government did have their reasons for doing this at the time, such as attempting to handle the uncontrollable inflation which was happening in immediate post-war Japan. But for the people in Japan who worked hard for their entire life and have saved up cash for their entire life in the form of the pre-1946 banknotes, all of the money earned throughout their lifetime through blood, sweat, and tears now meant nothing. For the younger generation of Japan, this is all old news. But for the elderly who are 70 years old plus, a lot of them still have this painful memory with them through their own experiences or having heard of it through their parents. And the Japanese government recently announced that they are going to issue new banknotes from July 3rd, 2024. Like, for no apparent reason at all, at least on the surface. Just new banknotes out of nowhere. But then, many in Japan believe that this is all a plan by the Japanese government to move the elderly in Japan, by far the wealthiest group of people in Japan, by an incomparable margin, to get their cash notes hidden under their beds and hopefully begin investing it in the form of stocks or government bonds. This is as government-related national broadcasters of Japan, such as the NHK, are constantly going to announce, probably on a monthly basis, leading up to July 2024, of how new banknotes will be issued from July, and the old ones will no longer be printed. And many elderly in Japan, whose only source of information and the way to stay up to date is the NHK news on television, are thus going to be incessantly reminded of this. Now, it goes without saying that unlike what the Japanese government did back in 1946, you can absolutely still use the old banknotes in Japan, even after the issuance of new banknotes beginning from July 2024. But we also know that a lot of the elderly are individuals of habit and are largely moved by memory and their emotional response to the situation. And with such a traumatic memory at that, of having their entire life savings being made worthless with the introduction of new banknotes during the post-war period, a lot of the elderly in Japan may find this as a wake-up call and consider this as a time to finally get their saved banknotes out of their bedroom and think of putting it somewhere else. And if you remember correctly, in 1946, all the money that was deposited to the banks were not returned to them by the Japanese government.
And it's gone.
What?
So in many of their minds, just quote-unquote depositing their money to a bank is not safe enough. So in their seeking of advice to find ways of where they can now inject their money, they may come across investment vehicles such as stocks, and wow, look at that. The Japanese government just passed a new plan this year and are going to make all the capital gains made in the stock market tax-free through the new NISA plan. And that's how the theory goes. Again, nobody knows for sure of just how much tangible impact the Japanese government's new NISA plan, combined with the issuance of new banknotes, will actually have on the wealthy elderly in Japan. And of course, whether all of this can finally make them begin investing their gargantuan savings. But the anticipation is undoubtedly there, thus the reason why many analysts in Japan point at the new NISA plan as one of the primary reasons why investors both in Japan and from abroad invested heavily into the Japanese stock market in the month of January 2024, and thus partly how the Nikkei 225 index was able to surpass levels beyond the one experienced at the height of the bubble era, independently from the nation's recessionary economic atmosphere that is mainly being felt by the debt-heavy, broke citizens of Japan under the age of 40. Now, there are a lot more reasons contributing as to why the Japanese stock market skyrocketed in the recent phase despite the real economy suffering from a recession. But if we go over every point in depth, this video will have to be more than an hour long. So now that we've went over the NISA plan, which I wanted to do first and foremost, as I rarely saw of this being mentioned in the West, while being prominently done so in Japan itself, let us quickly go over other reasons other than the weak yen that has contributed to this paradoxical phenomenon of record-breaking stock market performances in Japan, while the economy simultaneously entered into a recession. In 2022, the Tokyo Stock Exchange, or the TSE, went through a major market restructuring. Prior to the restructuring, the TSE had 4 market segments: First Section, Second Section, Mothers, and JASDAQ. But then, the officials at TSE stated that such market segment division was rather ambiguous, which led to reluctance of investors to invest in the Japanese stock market. So on April 4th, 2022, they restructured the stock market, and after the market restructuring, they now had 3 market segments: Prime Segment, Standard Segment, and Growth Segment. Now, if you're the CEO of a stock exchange enlisted Japanese corporation, you may think, big deal, they played around with the names of the market segments a little bit. Our company is just in a segment with a new name now, business as usual. But then, the Tokyo Stock Exchange announces something really crazy, showing how they really mean business this time. They talked about how after investigation, they found how almost 200 companies that are currently enlisted in the prime market segment did not qualify to the new criteria set during the market restructuring. Hence, time will be given to these problematic firms in the prime segment to meet the new criteria mandated by the TSE, and if they fail, they might even face consequences, such as being delisted from the Tokyo Stock Exchange.
It's not personal, son. It's strictly business.
If any of you guys are further interested in what kind of criteria that the people at the Tokyo Stock Exchange mandated to these enlisted firms, you can read the white paper on corporate governance published by the Tokyo Stock Exchange in 2023. There's an English version as well. And in the white papers, they demanded a number of changes from the enlisted corporations, some of which are kind of obvious. as in ensuring dialogue with shareholders and conducting equal treatment to both general shareholders and minority shareholders. But then, some of their demands were actually practical demands that could potentially have a direct positive impact on the nominal stock prices of these companies, such as how at least 1/3 of the board of directors now have to be independent external directors, and demanding the companies with a price-to-book ratio of below 1 to basically publicize plans to fix their below 1 PBR ratios. And if they do not get this done until the moratorium period, which ends in March 2025, they face the potential repercussions of eventually being downgraded or even delisted from the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Then the TSE created a new index, such as the JPX Prime 150 Index, which basically enlisted companies that did a good job with every improvement measures in which the people at the Tokyo Stock Exchange delineated in their 2023 white paper, and encouraged the Japanese pension fund. The Japanese public pension fund is absolutely massive, by the way, as well as institutional funds, to invest in the companies that are enlisted on the JPX Prime 150. So at this point, the Tokyo Stock Exchange enlisted companies now know that the guys at TSE mean business and how they can't just feel complacent and mess around anymore. So already as of January 2024, 40% of firms on TSE's Prime section have disclosed plans, which shows their commitment towards meeting the set of demands listed in TSE's white papers. And with so many of the demands made by TSE being ones that have a direct impact on the immediate nominal valuations of the company stocks, such as raising their price-to-book ratio to above 1, it is said that the market restructuring and the subsequent strong stance held by the Tokyo Stock Exchange towards the existing Prime section companies had a large impact on the recent upward trend of the Nikkei 225. And of course, there are other potential reasons as well, such as outflow of capital from China entering Japan, and ultra-loose monetary policy by the Bank of Japan leading to, yes, the weak yen. We would like to end this video with yet another rather boring-looking government graph published by Japan's Ministry of Finance. We now know that many of the corporations in Japan are getting richer by the day, with their stock prices reaching all-time highs. So they must be paying equally high amounts of corporate taxes to the government, right? Unfortunately, especially unfortunate for the citizens of Japan, that is not the case. The graph shows the percentages in which the different taxes collected by the Japanese government has contributed to the national budget. And there is one particular line that stands out, the red line. From only being 4.6% of the total government national budget in the year 1990, as of 2022, it is now officially the highest contributing form of tax revenue that is consisting the largest percentage of the Japanese government budget. So one may assume, hey, that red line must be corporate taxes, eh? The stock valuations of Japanese companies have been skyrocketing ever since the introduction of Abenomics.
Thank you very much.
So they must also be paying in equally high amounts in corporate taxes. And in the ideal world, that should be the case. However, the red line is not corporate taxes. It is the consumption tax. The tax that has to be paid by the everyday people of Japan, whether they buy a ticket for the bus or when a homeless person buys a little onigiri from the convenience store. I still remember vividly, soon after Abe began his
By my Abenomics.
shenanigans, the bus prices that I had to pay every day increased just overnight. So that is what Japan is doing right now, skimming money off of the ordinary citizens who already have no money left with their meager 200,000 yen monthly salary. And the green line that has steadily been becoming a smaller and smaller part of the government tax revenue, that is, as hard as it is to believe, corporate taxes. So paradoxically, the Japanese corporations that are doing better than ever financially with favorable monetary and fiscal policies across the board, rather than paying more corporate taxes, are paying less, or less at least relative to the unreasonable amounts of consumption tax burden that has been imposed to the everyday Japanese citizens ever since the introduction of Abenomics. Now, to be fair, the Japanese government do have their theoretical reasons for doing this. You tax the companies less, then the companies have more money to spend on research and development, etc., which leads to higher competitiveness of the company, which will eventually lead to increased wages for its employees, etc. But as many of us know, while the trickle-down effect may sound alright in theory, rarely does it ever help in reducing income inequality and aid in the well-being of the everyday people in reality. So with that said, if the Japanese government keeps up with this, please excuse my language, of ripping money off of the broke ordinary citizens who barely make enough to get by and pay for their enormous debts, while helping the stock market and listed corporations to reach even peak of the economic bubble era surpassing level of nominal valuations in the stock market while not even taxing them properly, and continue to act like lenient parents who buy everything for their spoiled kids, then the ordinary, hardworking citizens of Japan will continue to get poorer, while the wealthy shareholders and executives of these Japanese corporations drink the exorbitantly priced champagnes in their Minato Ward penthouses.